Okay, so also moving along in terms of the new and exciting implementations that we saw Gus mention in our opening address today. Our next presenter is Andrew Swan. Andrew is one of our nation's leading sheep geneticists with over 30 years experience, starting at Siro with the T13 project, and then also playing a large part in the implementation of Merino Select, the introduction of genomic evaluations, and the development of indexes into the sheep industry. In terms of this, he also has a fairly good grounding on the ground and involvement in the industry through his role as a technical advisor for AMSIA, and he's a local committee member here with the New England Sire Evaluation. Please welcome Andrew Swan today to talk about reproduction now and into the future.
Cheers, Luke. Thanks, Luke, and thanks to Gus and the team for the opportunity to talk to you today. And hello, everyone. And Peter, when I was a boy, phones had handles on them and you were on party lines, so people would listen into your conversations. Anyway, we've come a long way from that, obviously. So what I'm going to go over today is how we've, over the last couple of years, really reinvented what sheep reproduction breeding values are. So just as an outline, we've moved from net breeding values to component trait breeding values. We've introduced genomics into the analysis, put in more correlated traits to help the accuracy of our reproduction analyses. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is that it's not just about reproduction. Recording this information can help you with other aspects of genetic evaluation. So, from net reproduction to component traits. So, the current analysis that we have the ASPV that we have is for number of lambs weaned. Now that's a net reproduction trait. This is the trait that we use in indexes. Comes out of an analysis at the moment that does not use genomic information. It's the only analysis that we have that is like that. It does have data quality issues, some of which are really fundamental flaws, so we can't really do anything about them. And so we're treating that as a legacy analysis at the moment. It has to keep going for a little while, as Gus said, to support indexes. But 2 years ago, we first introduced this component trait analysis for maternal breeds. And so what it is that we're breaking down NLW into its components. You can think of that as starting out at joining, so there's a trait for conception, and then through to lambing, where we have the trait litter size, and then through to weaning, where we have ewe rearing ability, which is basically lamb survival as a trait of the ewe. What this change has allowed us to do is make greater use of data, and at the same time it gives breeders the capacity to focus on the individual components. So why that might be important is shown on that little graphic there, where you're looking at the economic values of the three different component traits as your average flock litter size changes. And what you can see there down the bottom is that as your average flock litter size increases, the value of changing it further actually goes negative. Whereas you're looking at rearing ability there is increasing as flock litter size increases as well. So this is an important point that it depends where you are, what level of emphasis you want to put on each of those traits. And splitting them up, as we have done, gives you the capacity to do that. So what we might want to aim for is ewes that have a moderate number of lambs and wean them all, as opposed to something that has a lot and ends up with nothing. So just a little bit more detail on the analysis. It is a genomic analysis, and it has it's multi-trait analysis. So in addition to the three component traits, conception, litter size and rearing ability, which are further split up into yearling and repeated adult expressions. The analysis also has maternal behaviour score in it as a new trait, also condition score as a new trait, along with pre-joining weight, and we also include muscle and fat in growing animals. And then, of course, we have male fertility as scrotal circumference in the analysis. So it's up to 19 traits in the merino analysis. So maternals we first launched in 2019. You can see the scale of the analysis there. And merinos, we redeveloped the system for last year, and so merinos are on version 2 of the software. The maternals are still on version 1, and there's an update ready to go for them as well. And that will happen when we transition to ASBV status in 2021, as Gus has already said, and that'll be accompanied by breeder workshops to go over the changes in the coming months, and beyond that, redevelopment of indexes to use the component traits as Gus described before. So just on the characteristics of the data, this is the amount of data that is in each analysis over the last 5 years. You can see that we have the most data for litter size, 120,000 records in maternals and 240 in merinos. And then the number of records comes back for the 2 other traits, rearing ability and conception. And if you look at that as a proportion, in theory, it would be possible with perfect recording to have 120,000 rearing ability records as well, and even more conception records, because these 2 traits are only occur with successful lambings. Maternals are getting a greater efficiency in recording those 2 other traits in comparison to merinos. Is what that is saying there. Also, we're getting more representation across the Lamb Plan members than we are in Merino Select. So just to look into the reasons why that pattern occurs, it is actually simpler to derive the litter size data, because what we actually need is accurate pedigree and birth types. With that information, we can derive a litter size phenotype. In the new analysis, we also can use preg scan data from mating records, but that will be used. The pedigree will be used in preference to that. We'll go to preg scans if we can't get a record out of the pedigree. Whereas with conception, additional information is needed on mating records and the successful conception, and breeders putting in fictitious dry tags to reflect unsuccessful matings is required there. So if people are not putting in those, they won't get data going into the analysis, and you'll see this effect over here. Likewise, with rearing ability, we need records of basically rearing type and the fictitious tags for dead at births. If you've got those, you will get era records. There's a lot of filtering that goes on to ensure high data quality, but the 2 big ones are actually right at the very beginning. If you don't have dam pedigree on more than 70% of lambs, a drop will not go into the analysis. And the second one is that we have birth rear type inconsistencies with lamb pedigrees. If that's greater than 20%, that won't go in. So an example of that would be if you only have 1 lamb out of a set of twins in the data, that would be considered incomplete, so that we remove that. So you can see that if you're actually recording dam pedigree, you will get into the analysis with litter size. You have to do these extra things, mating records, dry tags and dead at birth, to get the other traits. The analysis does work really well. We've proven that a number of times looking at validation analyses, so that looking at prediction of future progeny formants. That works really well in both Merinos and Maternals. I just want to show you this graph here of an example of the genetic trend that we observe. There's really three things about this graph. The first is that now that we're not going to continue with NLW, we have actually developed a new tool, weaning rate breeding value, which we derive from the three components. And so that's actually shown there on the green line. The second thing is that we do see genetic progress in the components across breeds, but in this example we've got a flock who's doing really well, so making 2 to 3 times the amount of genetic progress that you see in the breed. And the third thing that's nice about this is that it's not all about litter size. So you can see here for this flock that there is a real focus on improving conception in yearlings. They've also got positive changes in rearing ability. It's a very difficult trait, so, but there are small changes there. And we see a similar pattern in adults. Okay, one of the things that makes this such a good analysis is that it uses genomics, and in a single-step analysis, underpinned by reference populations, and we see good improvements in accuracy for young rams. Single step is basically using all information combined into one analysis. Animals can have varying levels of information. They can be in there with just pedigree or just genotypes, or in addition they can have phenotypes as well. So we use all of the information in this analysis with the greatest efficiency. And when we do that, we can see reproduction really is the classic case in sheep for the value of genomics, because it is a hard to measure trait, low heritability, measured in adult ewes past the major point of selection, and only in females. So having a genomic prediction for reproduction is really valuable. Increased accuracy leading to increased genetic gain. So how genomic prediction works, and there's a session on this afterwards, is through a reference population. We need to set up reference populations and record reproduction on lots of ewes, and also genotype them so that we can establish a relationship between DNA and phenotype. And then when breeders DNA test their young animals, they can use that relationship to the reference to derive a genomic prediction. And it's not just genomics though, it uses all information to calculate a genomic breeding value to drive selection. So the genomic reference populations for reproduction, we can see over here for Merinos, that's evolved over time. We first started off in the days of the sheep CRC between 2007 and 2011. There was some reproduction data collected there, but the focus of that was really on carcass traits. So the reference didn't really get going until say 2015, when MLA started investing in the genotyping in breeder flocks to build the reference out in the industry. So that's built up this reference in both Merino Select and Lamplan. And then the third source for Merinos only is the Merino Lifetime Productivity Project run by AWI and ANSI, and that has generated quite a substantial reference between 2015 and 2018. So you can see the total reference is around 14,000 at the moment for Merinos, 10,000 for Maternals. Gus said that the number of genotypes in the Merino analysis is now 125,000. So you can see that there's a big difference between what's available as a reference population and the total number of genotypes. Given that reference population size, this is the sorts of accuracy improvements we're actually seeing. This is an example from the merinos. So what we're seeing here is the average accuracy for ungenotyped rams compared to their genotyped contemporaries within breeders' flocks. And that was the point about 6 to 12% improvement in accuracy. This is a theoretical relationship that people wheel out a lot of the time, which shows how the accuracy of genomic breeding values for animals without phenotypic measurements increases as the size of the reference population increases for traits with different size heritability. So that's a heritability of 1. A lot of these traits have lower heritabilities than that. So where we're at about now with these levels of accuracies and this sort of reference population size is about there. And as we continue to increase it, we can expect to see further increases in accuracy. Okay, so that's the value of genomics. The other aspect of this model is that we include a number of other traits to help with the accuracy of our reproduction breeding values. The really important point to remember, though, is that the best way to improve reproduction is actually to measure it directly. However, we still do have small favourable correlations with the other traits, including body composition, maternal behaviour and fertility, and all that information is used when we're calculating the breeding values. So just to go over some of the correlations, this is pre-joining weight and condition score, or adult weight. You can see there generally small positive correlations with condition score and the component traits, although we do see a negative correlation between yearling conception and adult weight, which I would say is a stage of maturity type of correlation. Now, we do have repeated records of reproduction for the adult traits in the analysis, and we do account for a level of non-genetic repeatability. Those correlations are actually stronger, and what they actually mean is that we've got a fairly strong, moderate negative correlation for condition score with the reproduction traits. Basically saying that if you keep on having lambs, you will have less condition in the end, and a similar story here for adult weight. That's the side of the equation that you deal with management, and then these are the relationships that are relevant to breeding. But the important point here is that we disentangle these effects to make the breeding values as accurate as we can. Okay, we also include, yearling post-weaning fat and muscle from growing animals in the analysis, and they're most highly correlated with condition score, so here, but also with pre-joining weight. So that's where they're having their main benefit, to make the new condition score breeding value more accurate. But there are also tend to be small genetic correlations with reproduction. So that goes back to my original point in introducing this section, that to make gains in reproduction, you need to measure reproduction itself. The other stuff will help you a bit, but it's always best to measure the trait directly. Okay, maternal behaviour score is a breeding value we haven't had before, and you can see negative genetic correlations with the reproduction traits. Those are actually more favourable because lower maternal behaviour scores are better. If we're improving that trait, we're going to see more lambs with better survival. Scrotal circumference in size is included in the analysis, and it has, as we've known for a long time, small positive correlations with female reproduction. So size with rams with better scrotal circumference lead to better daughter performance. that trait's actually reported out of the main analysis now. And at some time in the future, we could look at reporting it out of this reproduction analysis, where it itself would be gaining information from the female side of the reproduction. So that would be a good thing to do as well. Okay, just the last thing I wanted to go over is you know, the fact that if we do a good job on recording reproduction, it can have benefits in other areas for other traits. And the simplest example of that is that just about every trait we have in ASBV for is adjusted for birth rearing types to make sure that we're making fair comparisons between singles and multiples. So it is really important to get accurate information on birth and rearing types, just to start with. Now, Kim has also recently been working on relationships for our component traits with wool traits in merinos, and we do see small antagonistic correlations, but they're not large enough really to be a problem as long as you're doing balanced index selection. But what I wanted to give you an example of was how we can use the new information to correct adult wool traits for repro status in merinos, which is some work that we've been doing with Sue Mortimer from New South Wales DPI. So we picked adult fleece weight as the trait we would look at to see how reproduction affects that. And in doing so, we were looking at cumulative effects on both the current and previous reproduction shearing cycles. When we looked at the data, we can clearly identify different management strategies going on. So we can see that people doing shearing pre-joining, that's the most common pattern, or the other one is shearing in between joining and lambing. And most of the data there is actually from the ultrafine type in sheep genetics and is probably really from data. A lot of data around the New England region would come into that category. So we looked at adjusting adult fleece weight for different reproduction outcomes, and so estimated penalties for different statuses. And here's the table of that just for the pre-joining shearing option. And so what we're looking at here is relative to being a dry in the current cycle versus a dry in the previous cycle. That's our baseline. And then if you have a single but you lose the lamb, a single and you wean the lamb, multiples and you lose both, multiples and you raise a single, and multiples and you wean everything. So you can see that from here to there, if you rear a multiple, if you rear multiples, you're losing 14% of it's at 14% lower fleece weight than if you were dry. And what we see with that colour shading makes it pretty clear that the current outcomes are largest, but there is a cumulative effect if you're down here having multiples and weaning them from year to year. So what impact does that have on breeding values? We then calculated some breeding values for adult greasy fleece weight with and without adjustment, and then looked at the bias, so subtracted one from the other. And you can see, sure enough, in ewes where it's going to be the problem, if you're dry in both cycles, you get an artificial advantage of up to 2% there. Singles, a little bit of a disadvantage, and multiples, a little bit more of a disadvantage. Now, context is important here. There's not many sheep in the database that actually have that status there, so we're only looking at 3% of the animals. So the greatest bias is actually in the least common categories. If we look at the relationship across the whole set of ewes that I had in this particular analysis, it's a big range in fleece weights overall. You know, on that level, you know, it's not having that much impact. Similarly with size, we can look at the bias and relate that to their litter size breeding value in this case. And there's definitely a negative relationship, but there's a lot of variation around that. And if we look at the whole data, you know, the breeding values are not really changing much in the context of the whole database. So if you go to the Merino Select website and look at the leading size for fleece weight, they still will be the leading size for fleece weight even if we did the adjustment. Size, it's less of a problem than just for a ewe, which is experiencing the reproduction, because they will have a number of daughters with a range of outcomes. So it tends to even out. So it's definitely something that we should do, and we will prioritise that at some stage in the future. But at the moment, it's really important to keep the problem in perspective. So, and that perspective is that at the moment, 1/3 of adult data could be potentially affected by reproductive status, but on the other hand, 2/3 of adult data is not, and 95% of the total wool data in Merino Select is not as well. So that's really a reflection that a lot of wool data is recorded on young animals, most wool data. And the other thing, as I said, was the impact is greatest in the least common categories. So while it's something that we definitely should do, it's unlikely to be a game changer with current recording patterns. Not that we wouldn't want people to record more adult fleece data. We would really encourage that. Anyway, just to summarise, Mr. Chairman, so we have these new reproduction component traits. They work better than the old analysis, and we're transitioning them to ASBVs in 2021. In addition, we'll have the breeding values for condition score and maternal behaviour, and then we'll be redeveloping the indexes to use this new information over the coming year or two. So the analysis gives us better trait definitions and use of data, increased accuracy through genomics, and takes account of all the correlated traits that are in the analysis as well to help improve it. And just finally, that to what we were just looking at there, that recording repro is not just a good thing for repro itself, but it can have benefits for adjusting for other traits. And just to acknowledge the people that have worked on the team, MLA and Sheep Genetics, and AWI and MLP and AMSI. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so questions for Andrew, and we've got quite a few, which is good to see. So we'll just take them off the top, if that's all right with you, Swaney. So is a flock's level of relationship to the reference population reported?
Not explicitly, but it is reflected in the accuracy of breeding values. So if you have a stronger relationship to the reference, you will get a greater boost in accuracy from recording for genomics, which it's built in, but it's hard to detect yourself because you don't have the comparison.
Okay, next on the agenda, based on the improvements in accuracy of repro traits when you do genotype, do you have a recommendation around the level of genomic testing in a flock that would be aiming to boost their reproduction? Yeah,
so you will get the, if you're, I suppose the baseline would be to genotype young rams, and that will pick up, they will get the boost in accuracy. If you want to, and a lot of people are actually genotyping all of their young rams. I think that, that will get you most of the way. If you want to be part of the reference flock, you can also genotype ewes that you keep for breeding as well. But that's another level of cost.
Okay, so we're going to go into condition scoring. So as you highlight, there's a negative correlation with repro. Is that causative for repro or as a result of reproduction?
Yeah, so that...
And are they different?
Sorry, Luke. So there was actually a positive correlation, genetic correlation for condition score with repro, a small positive correlation. The negative correlation is like an environmental correlation. So that, it's not due to the genetics, it's due to environmental aspects that are permanent across the environment. So that is something that you would address through management.
Next one's a bit of a doozy. After conception and litter size, is there not a trait about a lamb's inherent ability to survive, as well as a ewe's ability to rear?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. You can look at lamb survival. It disappeared. No, it went to the top. You can look at lamb survival as a trait of the ewe, or you can look at lamb survival as a trait of the lamb. So they are different traits. Basically, previous research has shown that the trait of the ewe has a higher heritability than the trait of the lamb. And this is a ewe-level model, so that's why we've started there. It's not to say we wouldn't go to another analysis that had lamb survival as a direct trait of the lamb. The problem you have with that is in the quality of the data, and that is that a lot of the time people don't actually observe the lambs which die. And so they're often, you can infer them at the level of the ewe, say from comparing scanning to weaning results, for example. But if you don't observe the lamb that died, you often don't know the pedigree, so you just lose accuracy there. So to make that trait, I think that we will have to do something like have a specific program targeting even genotyping dead lambs to be able to determine their pedigree and to be able to build up a reference population. So birth weight's another part of that question, but maybe,
It's particularly merinos and their ability to meet their maker is a fairly strong trait, no doubt. I'll push the last one. Hamish, can I just, that last question, can you just give me a thumbs up if that's in your talk? Not specifically. Okay, so we'll answer the middle one, Swaney. So any insights to impacts of prior and current repro status and whether that's able to be identified from flocks that have participated in lifetime ewe management versus non-lifetime ewe?
Yeah, we didn't specifically attempt to identify those flocks. I do know that the MLP data is managed to LTEM requirements, so we can look at that there, and then it would be a matter of identifying other non-LTEM flocks to get at that. But we need more information on which flocks are doing what to be able to determine that.
And the last one is, I guess, more in your knowledge sphere than in relation probably to your talk. How do you get a stronger relationship to the reference flock?
Well, when it's a reference flock like the one out at Kirby tomorrow, that people might see tomorrow, get a ram in there, or use rams that have been part of the reference, or offer your ewes to MLA for genotyping, so you can be part of the reproduction reference and record reproduction.
Thanks, Andrew. Let's put our hands together for Andrew once again.